be on that list, I'm sure.
Thank you, Joanne. That was very helpful, very beneficial.
Presentation loaded up here.
Come on. Russell, let's have some pitter-patter, or just patter, no pitter, to entertain.
Well, let me tell them about Joanne's.
Okay,
I'm going to tell you about the case that Joanne alluded to, where my client was in my office we were talking for about an hour, and we were just getting up to leave. Thank you, Cheryl. He was getting up to leave, and he said, "Oh, by the way, you know, the caretaker is driving. I just found out Mom had a car, and she'd never had a driver's license, and she's in the nursing home." And I said, "Excuse me?" She, what? And so we had a little bit of problem getting the SAPD interested, but Eyewitness Wants to Know was very interested. And so, and Eyewitness Wants to Know is standing outside of the car dealership. And by the way, they threw me out of the car dealership. You were right, Joanne. I went over there and I told them what happened, and literally threw me out of the car dealership. And so I felt really good when I was watching the Eyewitness Wants to Know outside of the Volvo dealership. But essentially, the caregiver took the salesman over to the nursing home, and all of a sudden this lady bought a car. And fortunately, I was able to convince the lender that, who was, by the way, going to get an award for protecting the elderly the next week, and we were going to put this on Eyewitness Wants to Know on Monday. And so they were very helpful in taking the car back. It's amazing. We as attorneys get discouraged when we see what happens to our clients, but in this case, with Joanne's help, the caregiver did go up the river. I was hoping that the Volvo guy would go up the river, but that didn't happen. But anyway, just to give you a little more information on what Joanne was talking about.
Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome.
Okay, so.
We're still waiting for the presentation to get loaded here, a little technical difficulties. So what is one of the most interesting cases that you worked on?
Well, I had a really great case that I'm not sure what the outcome is, but the DA took it, and that was where the gentleman met his little lady at Jim's.
Jim's house?
No, Jim's restaurant.
Oh, sorry, Jim who, Carol? Help me out here.
No, Jim's restaurant. Met him, moved in, married him, put him in the nursing home, changed the will.
Wow, she was kind of aggressive, wasn't she?
She was fast.
Wow.
All in the scale, all in 2 months' time.
And how many children did they have?
Well, he was 86.
Meaning?
Well, and she was 58, I think.
Okay.
So that was a very exciting case and much enjoyed by people who like the story of meeting your love at Jim's. Okay, we about ready?
2 minutes.
2 more minutes. What's your most interesting case?
Thank you. I think it was one of the cases that when I was working at a company who provided caregivers, one of the caregivers had a pretty long-standing relationship of about 4 or 5 months with the family, had engendered herself to the elderly couple, and had talked them into letting her sign some checks. And at first everything was on board and she was making appropriate disbursements. And then I guess she had some financial difficulties of herself and decided to help herself out with a check to herself. And actually had presented it to the client for signature, so it looked like it was something that was legitimate. But when the daughter came in from out of town, she discovered that there were funds that were misallocated That's when the case was brought to us. From the caregiver side, what we ended up having to do was self-report to Adult Protective Services at the state level and say, our agency had this situation happen, and here's how we followed up on that. So it was interesting for me from an educational standpoint to see how that works on the agency side of these kinds of situations as well. And then we were able to put that caregiver on the registry of offenders. It's one of the requirements for people in healthcare to go to this registry and see if any of these employees that you're hiring are on that list. So therefore, if they're on the exclusion list, you cannot employ them as a healthcare professional. So she made that list and is no longer able to work in that field any longer. So there was some good parts to that. Unfortunately for the family, though, they did lose some money.
Can I just add to that? Is this on?
Try and turn it. Do we have Mike here? Hi, here's Mike.
And I know she's going to introduce us in a minute, and I'm going to preempt her. I'm Virginia Quinn with Adult Protective Services. What he's talking about there is the Employee Misconduct Registry.
There we go.
The Employee Misconduct Registry is actually held by APS. And a good way to look at it is kind of like a blacklist for, basically that's what it is, because after we validate against somebody for abuse, neglect, or exploitation, do you want them going in taking care of your parents? You know, those are the people that we want to make sure don't get hired by agencies again. Believe me, for all the attorneys in the room, you will be happy to know that there is due process before this happens.
Well, I think we're going to hear about that.
Yeah, we are.
And can anybody get, so if I'm hiring privately, someone through the grapevine says, oh, get Mary Jones, she's really good. Can I look at that list?
Absolutely. It's on the web. It's open. Anybody can do it. It's free. And also, I highly encourage, if you're going to get a private provider outside of an agency, in other words, not paid by an agency, you know, please do check them out on the Employee Misconduct Registry. And also, you should know that criminal case histories you can get from the Department of Public Safety. Any person can. You just go on to the Department of Public Safety, you pay for that criminal history. It's not very much. And you pay for that history, and voila, now you know their criminal case history.
There you go.
Very
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Let's get started.
Maybe we can go ahead without the PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Well, let me introduce Patty Sitchler, Patricia Sitchler to you, and Russell's going to introduce Virginia Quinn. Patty is a shareholder in the firm of Schoenbaum, Curfey, and Scanlon here in San Antonio. She's a certified elder law attorney, and she is also the co-chair of the Long-Term Care, Medicaid, and Special Needs Trust Committee in the Real Property, Estate, and Trust section of the American Bar Association. She's been listed in the Texas Monthly Super Lawyers since 2004, and she's an adjunct professor at St. Mary's in elder law since 1998.
And Virginia Quinn is a 22-year veteran law enforcement officer for Harris County, served as the City of San Antonio conducting internal investigations involving City of San Antonio employees, has been profiled on CBS television series Top Cops, and she was awarded the San Antonio Star by the San Antonio City Manager. Virginia is currently assigned as the exploitation subject matter expert for APS for Region 8, where she consults with staff on issues of elder abuse and exploitation. To talk more about exploitation in elderly, Patty Sitchler and Virginia Quinn.
Turn this on. Okay, can you hear me? I've got a lavalier on. No? No? Let's see. Oh, well, it's doing it now. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay. Hello? Excuse me, just a minute. This is Patty. oh, you got my name from somebody? And yes, I'm an elder law attorney, and this is how it starts. I get a phone call. And if this goes off again, you're going to see me jump. So let me, there we go. What will happen is I'll get a phone call and someone will say, well, Patty, I heard about you. You're an elder law attorney. So I need you to draft a deed for my mom. She wants to give me her property. Well, there's a difference between a scrivener and a lawyer. A scrivener would say, oh, okay, I'll send you a form and you just fill in the blanks and record it in the county. An attorney, though, is a counselor. And so I would be saying, who's my client? Is it the son who wants the land or the house, or is it the mom who I'm drafting a deed for? Does mom really want to transfer? I mean, the son's calling me, and I send him the deed. Does mom really know what she's signing? Does mom understand the ramifications of giving away a piece of property? You know, some of that property might be in that Eagle Ford shale, and the surface might not be worth very much. But there's a lot of squabbling going on right now about land in the Eagle Ford shale. And so does she understand the tax ramifications? Is there a mortgage on the property? Is mom expecting to get the property back? I hear, well, I'm just going to hold it for mom. Well, that's really not a gift. I mean, and there's this whole litany of questions that as an attorney I'm going through in my mind as I'm talking to that young man on the telephone. And so are they going to be using a power of attorney? Is this son going to be signing this gift deed with a power of attorney? Is there even any gifting authority in that power of attorney? Is it going to put a cloud on the title? Title companies don't like self-serving deeds. If they find out that son is signing that deed with the power of attorney and he's transferring it to himself, title companies, I mean, they're a for-profit outfit. They don't want to have somebody coming back and saying, wait a minute, that wasn't a valid deed, mom, that power of attorney was no good, or that was self-serving. And so what are the family dynamics? Is this son going to get this deed and then all of a sudden, actually another phone call, but it's going to be from Virginia's office, people with APS, because the daughter says, well, what am I, chopped liver? You know, I want to have something too. Where's my house or my land or my money? And so, and then the big deal is the attorney in cahoots with the kid. And that, by the way, that's a legal term in Texas. You're in cahoots. And so an attorney really needs to look through all of these things. That's my job. I'm a counselor. I've got to find out why that deed needs to be done. Often it's, well, mama's going into the nursing home and we understand that when she walks in the door, she's got to sign her house over to the nursing home. No, you don't have to do that. But that's why you as a counselor need to get involved and ask all those questions. So I've got to identify who my client is. I've got to counsel the client based on the underlying needs and facts, point out the pros and cons of doing this action, and help that client ultimately make a good decision. And in fact, I can fire the client. If the client is insistent, I want to do this, but I know that it is a bad thing. I know that that's the neighbor that's really pushing them. The neighbor, this gentleman is so lonely. And again, this is hard for me as an attorney, and I'm sure hard for you, Virginia, when you know there are 3 kids that live in this city and they don't ever go see dad, and so this lady across the street is coming over, and this lady is fixing meals for him and sitting there and listening to him talk, and she's doing a wonderful job. That's not a problem. But then she said, you know, you could give me your house and I'll take care of you forever. That's when she's crossed over that line. And as much as I tell him, I don't think this is a good idea, he's saying, look, it's my house. My kids don't come to see me. She does. But when she gets the house, what's going to happen? She can evict you. Do you understand that? She wouldn't do that. So those are the kinds of things that we as attorneys have got to look for. And we're in this baby boom generation that has always demanded results. You know, think about this. The boomers got the right to vote. We changed the age for alcohol consumption. No, we didn't. I think that's actually, we didn't do that one. But we still did it anyway. We also remember that schools, suburbs, televisions, and even Pampers were shaped around us as boomers. We ended the draft, got an end to the war, and so we're still demanding results. And in that results, boomers now are coming to me and to Carol and to Cheryl and Amy and Sean and demanding result. I can't pay for nursing home care. I didn't expect to live this long. And so you need to help me get that Medicaid stuff. Or I get the call from the kid, I need my inheritance. Oh, well, is Mama dead? Well, no, but she's going into the nursing home, so I need my inheritance. Well, Mama's got to die first before you get your inheritance. And so we're protectors, as well as counselors, as well as helping these boomers get where they're going. Are we up and going?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, and so I think what Virginia's going to do is she's going to give you some background about exploitation and abuse, and then I'm going to tell you how to avoid that for your client.
And I prefer to stand, if you don't mind, just because I'm one of those kind of speakers, right? And so if we could just go to the second slide, that'd be awesome. Where are we? The second one, right here? There we go. So this is our mission statement right here. The mission of Adult Protective Services, of course, is to protect older adults and vulnerable people with disabilities from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. That's our mission statement. And of course, our vision statement is protecting people with purpose, passion, and persistence, okay? So you'll see that at the bottom of a lot of our emails. What Patty was talking about when she was talking about the boomer generation, so the Social Security Administration calls it the silver tsunami, okay? I love that, because we're experiencing it certainly in our region. And when Dr. Schillerstrom talked about, one victim being worth a couple of $1 million, and Patty talking about attorneys getting involved in estate situations, that was the case that happened in that case. It was one of the cases that we've held down there in Karnes County, down in that right in the heart of that Eagle Ford Shale area, right? Little old lady, she's, about 86 years old. Nobody's ever paid any attention to her, except when she inherits just a little 100-acre farm, not very big, very modest little farm. These farms used to be worth, a couple $100,000 in the past, not a great deal of money. But when that oil boom hit, now those things are worth $35,000 an acre. Okay, so now we're talking $2.5 million. She's 86 years old, and suddenly she's a millionairess. And suddenly, miraculously, she has family members. Who'd have thought it, right? They come right out of the woodwork. Well, little did we know or even suspect that there was already somebody who was taking care of her. That was the city attorney. He's already been convicted now. Yeah, he lost his law license and everything. His name was Charles Quinta, and I can talk about him because he's public record now. Well, yeah, he sort of gifted himself a lot of her stuff, and was the beneficiary of a lot of her information, and so that didn't work out so well for him. So, but $2.5 million at 86. Yippee, right? So, about 2.1 million people are victims of elder abuse every year. It's estimated that only 1 in 5 cases is actually reported. So if they're not reported, how do we know? How do we know those cases if they're not reported? Well, I can tell you for a fact, and the caseworkers will tell you. What happens is that when we get a case, it's like not the first time this has happened to them. They've been victims before. A lot of times these perpetrators are what I call serial perpetrators. This is a good business if you can make a living at it, so they'll just go from person to person. But they get the script pretty quickly because it's like taking candy from a baby. If a person is confused or if they're easily befriended, then 70% of the wealth in this country is held by people age 65 and older. Yeah. Back in the roaring 20s, that bank robber, Willie Sutton, when the feds asked him, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. Right? Yeah, not anymore. Elderly people, that's where the money is. So, in 2012, here's some figures for you. APS in-home investigations program received a total of 107,000. Statewide, those cases, 59, almost 60,000 were validated. All right? And in Bexar County, we received a total of almost 10,000 reports. That's about 55% or so validated reports. So we try to be very careful before we validate against someone with an allegation, and it's only an allegation until we've investigated it and we find it valid. So I love to meet with attorneys who have the client's best interests in mind. So just a little information. This is Bexar County. In the middle there, 28 counties in our region in adult protective services. We go all the way from Del Rio in the west down to Lake Jackson in the southeast. So we're pretty busy. So where do we get our ability to do all this? In law, it's under the Texas Human Resources Code. Texas Human Resources Code mandates us to investigate cases. It requires reporting, just like child abuse. Elderly abuse, Texas is a mandatory reporting state. Okay? It also provides immunity for cooperating with an investigation, and that extends to financial institutions. So yesterday and the day before yesterday, I was out teaching RBFCU, Randolph Brooks Federal Credit Union. We do a lot of outreach to banks. I've taught at Jefferson Bank and USAA and just a whole lot of financial institutions. And the reason why is because they should know, and we like them to be aware of the fact that our laws are very friendly when it comes to giving information to protect seniors and disabled people. Okay? So it also provides confidentiality for the reporter. So anybody who calls in one of our cases, you would think, well, we're government, right? You can get those reports. Anybody can get those reports. They're open records. Yeah, not so fast. Not so fast. Not with our cases. Confidentiality of the reporter, very, very protected. All of our caseworkers know from basic training 101 that they are not allowed to tell the reporter who the reporter is. They're not allowed to say, because a lot of times we'll show up in people's doors and they'll say, who is it that called this in? Well, we're not allowed to tell you. Sometimes they guess and they guess correctly, but we don't confirm that. We don't. Matter of fact, that's a real big no-no. That'll get you fired super quick. Okay? So we never tell who the reporter is, and we've never had a judge order us to tell. I mean, it could happen, but it's sort of, I think everybody agrees here that would certainly have a dampening effect on future reporters. We want people to report. We want to encourage them to report because we want to help. So, and the law also provides us access to records, all kinds of records, okay? So we can get bank records, HIPAA records. We're actually exempt from HIPAA because we need to know what kind of state they're in. We need to know, do they need medical help? Do they need, when was the last time they saw a doctor? What kind of medications are they on? And, you can tell a lot by looking at a person's medications because you can see how much is in the bottle, when it was prescribed for them. You know how many pills are in the bottle? That tells you whether or not they're compliant with their medications, particularly if they're really life-saving medications like, you know, high blood pressure medication or diabetic medications or something like that that they really need. So this is our number. This is our main number right here. And I wouldn't put you through that. Go online. Just trust me, okay? First time I heard that I was 16, but trust me. Yeah, you're not going to want to call up. Anyway, so who's eligible for APS? This is our target population, age 65 or older, and 18 to 64 with what we call a substantial disability. So substantial impairment is a disability that grossly and chronically diminishes an adult's or physical mental ability to live independently or provide self-care. And so what that means is, and this is a relatively recent change, because we know that just because a person is, for example, you know, getting a SSDI income, or that they are, you know, in a wheelchair, they could be perfectly mobile, they might be employable, they could be, you know, perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, you know, summoning aid, getting the kind of assistance they need, et cetera. And so those are the people we really don't want to focus on. People we want to focus on are the people who really, a disability that causes a long-lasting, considerable inability to live independently. So the people who really need our care, those are the ones we want to focus on.